On today's show, there is a lot going on as we're in the thick of the MLB winter meetings. But the question is, what do the Padres have? What can they produce with? Everyone wants to talk about Soto, but what about some upgrades? Not just trade away. Trent Grisham, center field. Would it be okay? Would it make sense for them to swap him out and go and get Jung-Hoo Lee? All that and more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, December 5th. December 6th, if I'm not mistaken. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, or at L_Padres for only Padres updates, and Locked On Padres on YouTube, and go check out my baseball-related work at Just Baseball, where I write about the Padres and all sorts of fun baseball things with more cool plans in the works over there that you can keep an eye on. Today's episode, guys, we're going to be talking about primarily Jung-Hoo Lee, who I discussed, I think it was last week, when I discussed just the top tier of free agents. And I think that out of the top tier free agents, he might be the one that's being the most overlooked. And I think he's the one that makes the most sense for this Padres team. A Padres team that has, in fact, already been rumored to be attached to Jung-Hoo Lee. And I think that that's where we're going to start, is we have to talk about that rumor. And then we also have to talk about the fact that the Padres have Trent Grisham. And Trent Grisham has been an issue for a while. Let's start there, actually. Let's start there. Trent Grisham is one of those guys that has become a little bit of the bane of every Padres fan's existence. He's certainly an MLB starting worthy player, right? He's got some good value to him, but it mostly comes from his defense. And while he did make some strides to improve this year, in terms of his WRC+, he went up a little bit from 84 in 2022 to 91 in 2023. It's discouraging that all of the underlying numbers, i.e., the fact that he does hit the ball pretty hard, the fact that he has a good walk rate, like basically every year of his career. And actually, that goes all the way back to minor leagues. One of the reasons why I was so excited my first year of doing this podcast when the Padres traded for Trent Grisham was the Padres for so long struggled with on-base percentage, struggled with on-base percentage in 2019. If you remember, Franmil Reyes and Manuel Margot, even Manny Machado was a little bit down that year. They didn't have too many on-base threats. They just had guys who hit a lot of home runs. And don't get me wrong, that's good, but they needed a little bit more of a balance. They just weren't taking enough walks. And that's what's unfortunate about the Padres roster every year. They always are really great in one thing, and then they are absolute so garbage in another that it almost outdoes the positive. You know what I mean? It almost takes away from that. It's like having the best offense in the NFL, but then having the worst defense in the NFL, right? Like, it just kind of will make you average, obviously. Why am I talking and explaining? I feel like I'm mansplaining. I know I'm not technically, but it's like, this is the type of thing people say when they're mansplaining sports. But in all seriousness, like, that's what it's felt like with the Padres. And they make that upgrade with Trent Grisham. And it was great for a little bit, as we talked about before. But ever since the second half of 2021, he has been one of the worst offensive outfielders in the entire game. The only one who has been a little bit worse was Cody Bellinger. Cody Bellinger and I believe maybe Miles Straw. That's the territory that we're in when it comes to that. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Cody Bellinger's good. Yes, I'm talking about the overall numbers. Cody Bellinger is probably the second most coveted free agent, dare I say, currently on the market outside of Shohei Ohtani. But that's because of this year. I'm talking about cumulatively all those years, second half of 2021, Bellinger was right there. And Bellinger had some injuries and whatnot. You know what I mean? He had some injuries and some weird stuff with the shoulder that messed him up with making that big catch in the World Series. Grisham doesn't really have that same level. He's actually played pretty consistently. More than 130 games in each of the last 3 seasons, and 153 last year and 152 the year before. And the 132 in 2021 was the beginning of the season. So basically, since the second half of 2021, he doesn't miss time, which is a good quality to have. And again, he's also a Gold Glove winning center fielder. There's definitely not zero value for Trent Grisham. But my thinking is this. I just think, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, some other baseball people who are like, they're just really surprised that the Padres have stuck out with Trent Grisham for this long. especially number one, just giving his production. The fact that they've stuck out with him for so long, that this is a guy who just can't hit above 200. And while the power numbers are there, he's a great example for why Baseball Savant and looking at the red isn't always the best way to figure out, you know what I mean, who is sort of like a good player or whose underlying numbers are great. Because with him, he's always had a lot of red with the exit velocities, with his barrel percentage, right? With his chase rate is really good. And again, like his walk rate. But he just doesn't land the bat with the ball in a way that's going to be conducive to more consistent hits. There was a period at the beginning of this season that I was excited, but it ended up panning out. So again, that's why you can't always trust the Baseball Savant stuff just 100%. And a lot of people got excited that his hard hit rate spiked at the end of last season, which might have been something that portends of a breakout or a bounce back season, but it didn't. And the second reason people are surprised that the Padres haven't moved off Trent Grisham is because they seem to have moved off of everybody else. They have added more players than at a big level, more blockbuster deals and blockbuster trades than seemingly any team in the sport. So I think that's why a lot of people are surprised. It's like, all right, they went out and got Kim, and then they got Bogarts, even though they had Tatis and Kim, two guys that could play shortstop, and then potentially Jake Cronenworth if he wanted to play shortstop too. So a lot of people are surprised that this is kind of just has been their guy. And when you look at the league landscape, I think is a way to say it. From what I've talked to people about, it just seems like center field is one of those positions that you can see a lot of teams have a good one, and those are the most competitive teams, right? At least usually, and maybe at least lately. You have, good outfielders. That's usually going to be a big deal for you, especially because of, defense and whatnot and what have you, right? But with the Padres, they basically had a guy who, in my opinion, is a fourth outfielder. A fourth outfielder who I wouldn't be shocked if he goes to another team and does better. He still has some decent tools. I think if you tinker with his swing a little bit, have some adjusted sort of things there, and considering the Padres don't have a great history with getting the best out of their offense, as we talk about a lot on this show, and everyone frankly talks about, with the fact that everybody who gets here, they usually stay the same or get worse, with the exception of Gary Sanchez for some reason. If you look at kind of the best teams in the league, like look at how good their center fielder was. I know that the Mariners were a little bit of a mess here, but they have Julio Rodriguez. There's Brandon Nimmo, there's Cody Bellinger this past year. You had Lars Nootbaar was even pretty good. And then you have, some other guys like Corbin Carroll. I know he plays right field, but you get my sort of point here. And I think that is why it all coalesces into everybody being like, why are they so committed to this guy? I think he could be better elsewhere. And I think that he's got like a modicum of value, just a little bit, because like I said, I think that his hard hit stuff and his walk rate and his good defense is something to look out for. But I will also say Grisham's defense did go down a little bit this year if you go by defensive runs saved and outs above average. In his Gold Glove season in 2022, he had 8 defensive runs saved in the outfield in total and 14 outs above average, which is one of the highest at the position. And then this year, it was 1 defensive run saved and 7 outs above average. Maybe the defensive run saves part of that might be that Tatis was getting so many unbelievable outfield assists and whatnot. Like maybe Grisham wasn't having that, but Grisham has never been a guy that I think his strength has been throwing runners out necessarily, or even making diving catches for that mark. Instead, I think he actually makes defense look quite easy, which is what is the most appealing thing if I'm another team. He makes it look easy. So if you just edit and tinker some things, Grisham's like a nice, in my opinion, like bonus cherry on top in a package. You know what I mean? You can't get anything really that's going to help this team straight up for him. Maybe a low tier reliever that might help this team for next year, but otherwise I don't really see it. So I think that's why the Padres have to move off of him. And that's why Jung-Hoo Lee should be the Padres' top target. He's the dream scenario, and he's already been rumored with the Padres. But before we talk about that, guys, let me just take a quick second, a little bit of water. Let me talk to you about other things that keep you healthy. Not just water, ladies and gentlemen, although I recommend you all drink water. It's Jace. We love our friends over at Jace. I want to come to sports to escape, ladies and gentlemen, some of the craziness of life, but can we just take a second about preparing for tough situations? Obviously, you've got your water, but if you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or you're limited by more supply shortages, you know what I mean? And you have things that you have to be covered with, or you are covered, you're covering for someone else or whatnot. Well, don't worry. Thanks to our partners at Jace Medical, life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply. Even ED generics for Cialis or Viagra, Jace Medical has the Jace case. It's 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis. I'm reading the things right now. Sinuses? I think that's what it is. Skin infections, among others. Could happen to anyone. Could happen to any of us. And what I love about it, too, is that it's also customizable. All you have to do is visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. How cool is that? $20 off your order. Remember, just go to the website, Jace Medical, that's JASE, medical.com, and use offer code LOCKEDON to get 20 buckaroos off your order. Go check it out. And we are back. We are back. We are back. Ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for making us your first listen every day. Today's episode was a little bit late. That is coming into your feed because I'm still waiting on news from the winter meetings. What can I say? But hey, let's talk about Jung-Hoo Lee. I talked about Jung-Hoo Lee last week, but I just want to refresher that this guy is not being talked about as much, in my opinion, because he's not this super power hitter, right? It's a KBO star who's been a phenom since he was basically 18, and one of the things about him is he's a guy who hits for contact. And I know that might be something that is really appealing to a certain amount of fan base. I often find that, like, older fans, people who miss, and I understand sometimes people who miss a little bit of the old game when it was more about just batting average and just hitting the ball all over the place and slapping the ball across the infield and stuff and just getting on base, keeping pressure on. I do think that there is merit to that, even if the numbers don't always back it up. That's why I think Jung-Hoo Lee is. I think he's a throwback to that. I think he's, Luis Arraez, Stephen Kwan, these type of players who are just really contact oriented. And if you look at his numbers, he kind of matches up with those guys. Brendan Donovan, Alex Bregman, Nico Horner, Alex Verdugo. If you look at his zone contact percentage, he's better than all of those players based on his KBO stats. His average exit velocity is better than all those guys. His regular exit velocity is better than almost all of those guys except for Alex Verdugo. Line drive percentage is up there with some of the best. He has the ability to just be a hitter's hitter. And I think that's what's so exciting about him, frankly, is he has all that talent. And for a Padres team that's already got your Machados and your, to an extent, your Grishams, your Tatises, and your Bogarts, like, this is a team that has a decent amount of power. And don't get me wrong, I think that the loss of Soto, let's assume the loss of Soto will hurt that team quite a bit. But you know what? I don't really care because what we're talking about is replacing Trent Grisham with him. And if you look at some of the numbers, his numbers with 2 strikes are what's also awesome. For a team that was really bad and situational hitting and in clutch scenarios with 2 strikes, they're one of the least competitive teams in the league at putting out productive outs, the 2023 Padres, i.e. they wouldn't even get any sacrifice flies. They wouldn't even have hard grounders outside the infield, things that at least players have to make plays on. A lot of strikeouts, a lot of dribblers, double plays. Bogarts and Machado both combined for some of the most double plays for any duo of teammates in Major League Baseball. So, getting a player like Jung-Hoo Lee, who in KBO, check out these numbers. His swing percentage is 66% on 2 strikes, which is pretty high. He had a zone contact rate of, let me just make sure I get this right here, 98%. And he had a swinging strike percentage on 3.9% and a slugging percentage on he had just a swinging strike percentage of 3.9% and a slugging percentage of 450. And then regular, all counts, swing percentage at 41%, zone contact still really high at 97.5, swinging strike at just 3.2%, and his slugging at 530. So basically what that is telling you is the guy is a really hard out. You know what I mean? Like, this is a hard guy to get out. And I think that for this Padres lineup, for all the things that I just illustrated, I think that could be really good. And I've also heard that, now again, I don't know if this is confirmed or anything like that. This is just what some friends of mine told me, that he hasn't swung and missed at a fastball with 2 strikes in like forever. And if it has happened, it's only happened like once or twice, right? Like, this is a guy who's going to be a pest for major league pitchers if he translates over properly, right? It's not a guarantee that he's going to translate over, but, that's really good stuff. And the number 2 thing about him also is he's a capable defender. He's got a really nice arm. He gets to the ball quick. And if you look at some of his numbers, let me see if I can pull them up right here with his defense. He's a really fast player. They call him the grandson of the wind, which is cool because his father had that nickname. He doesn't steal a lot of bases, but he could be a really good base runner. And remember, it's not speed isn't only measured by stolen bases. It's also measured by, your ability to run around the bases and not make mistakes. Think Juan Soto. You know how Juan Soto has a lot of moments where you're like, what's going on here? He's really good at that, and he could just score easier. He could score from first base, all that sort of things. And those things add up, by the way, especially out of a player who, if he were to translate into your Arise type, that would be awesome at the top of the lineup for this Padres team. Right? Could you imagine at the top of this lineup, they were rocking Ha-Seong Kim last year, which was great too, because Ha-Seong Kim increased the amount of pitches that he saw, so he could be great. Imagine if maybe you mix it up a little bit. Maybe you have, Jung-Hoo Lee at the top of the lineup. Maybe you put Kim a little bit down because he does have, I think, a little bit more power potential than Jung-Hoo Lee, but we'll have to see. Or you just have Jung-Hoo Lee maybe bat 5th, depending on what happens with Soto, if it's just Bogarts, Tatis, Machado, which is obviously still an incredible 3, guys. Do not give up on these 3 guys. Like, that's still a great 3, especially if we expect Tatis to get better batting-wise next year. If you have that, you could just have some real pests in your lineup, right? With Ha-Seong Kim and with Jung-Hoo Lee, 2 guys that can see a lot of pitches, can have productive outs, and hopefully be good in the clutch. And I think that that's what translates here. So he's got the speed and also the defense. He's, like I said, he has a really good arm. And if you just look up highlights with him, since the start of 2020, which is 436 games, he's racked up 28 outfield assists, which is pretty dang good, right? So he's really good in center field, and I think that that's why you keep hearing reports that the Padres are attached to him. If you actually look on MLB Trade Rumors, just the first thing that pops up from December 4th, Bleacher Report is saying that they're one of the teams, along with with a couple of others. I think the Dodgers were rumored a little bit. Granted, the Dodgers are rumored for literally every player. You know what I mean? But the Yankees also is another one because they've been, really looking for some upgrades in that outfield, I think, to complete it, especially with Stanton becoming more of a DH for them as of late. So that would be really cool. That's why I think he's a great fit with Trent Grisham. And if you were to trade Trent Grisham, also keep in mind that you have Jackson Merrill upcoming in the minors. And Jackson Merrill, maybe he could be also a center fielder. So you would all of a sudden have Tatis in right field. You'd have Grisham. You could have Jung-Hoo Lee in center, or more interestingly, you can move Jung-Hoo Lee to left field. Maybe you can do that. Maybe he can be just as effective there and be a huge upgrade over the defense that Juan Soto gave you. And then, boom, you've got, say, Jackson Merrill in center field, or you've got some platoon. Maybe you have Jackson Merrill. Maybe you have Jose Azocar as we'll figure it out. But I don't hate the idea of our top prospect, depending on how things play out, of course, being the guy that you're hoping to be good for you, right? At least there's potential there, and you could be excited about that, right? This is the fun part about having prospects is they give you some hope, especially when the rest of your team, you've already got the star power covered. So that's why I think that he could be a really good fit for this Padres team. And I think it makes the most sense, frankly. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it, and how maybe trading away Trent Grisham is a really key priority in the Juan Soto deal after just a few messages from our sponsors. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. I really spoke quite fast. That was crazy. I talked really, really fast during that segment, let me tell you. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, here's another thing that I want to point out. Another thing that's really important about Jung-Hoo Lee. Probably the most important thing. He's not going to cost as much. A $50 million potential salary. Remember what we got Ha-Seong Kim for? A deal that now looks like an absolute bargain. That's why Jung-Hoo Lee. And I know that Cody Bellinger sounds fun. I know that Shohei Ohtani sounds fun. I know that there's all sorts of players. I know the idea of trading for Brian Reynolds was fun once upon a time. You know what I mean? But this is not necessarily a deep free agent class. And I would much rather, given the Padres' financial constraints, just given all the uncertainty and the weirdness with this roster and wanting to have flexibility, I'd much rather try and go after Jung-Hoo Lee instead of a high-profile free agent, or say, let's say, I don't think that this is happening, but like a Luis Robert, right? Like that would be the other thing to do, is just trade your entire farm again for Luis Robert, who would probably be great, but I'd rather keep the assets right now. We've done a little bit too many trades, and they just finally built up this farm. So instead, you go get Jung-Hoo Lee. Let's say it's a little bit more than Ha-Seong Kim, right? Let's say it's a little bit more than Ha-Seong Kim. I'm actually wondering if SpotTrack actually has anything for Jung-Hoo Lee. Let me see if they do actually. You would be able to get him for a much more affordable rate and be able to figure out all of your sort of issues when it comes to the Padres roster constraints and their spending reduction, right? That's why Jung-Hoo Lee makes the most sense. And if you look at what Ha-Seong Kim got, let me see what Ha-Seong Kim got from the Padres. Let me see. What the heck did we give him? I always forget what deal it was. This is like 4 years, right? Yeah, 4 years, $28 million. So if it's like 4 years, $50 million, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. That's a little bit more than like $16 million a year. You could do that. It would be much less, and it would only be for 4 years, and that might be a lot more tolerable for ownership and such to figure that out, right? Like I think that if you are like right on the edge of that 200 million threshold, I bet you if it's like a shorter contract, maybe you can swing that as well, right? So I could absolutely see that. Or maybe it'll be 4 years, 40. You know what I mean? Maybe it's going to be around that. Either way, much more affordable player that you're not going to have to give a giant contract to, the way that you're going to have to give it for Cody Bellinger. And I'm not saying that there's a bad thing that's bad for Cody Bellinger. He's MLB proven, and I mean, at least mostly, we have to see. Cody Bellinger's fascinating. Like I don't remember a player who went from MVP to out of the league to back to MVP. And it wasn't just like, oh, he was hurt like 1 year, he was bad. No, he was like pretty rough for like 3 years, guys. Like Cody Bellinger looked done. That's even the Dodgers gave up on him. And the Dodgers like are amazing, right? Like that's like the tier 1 organization for getting the best out of their players. And even they said, oh, we can't do this. You know what I mean? Like that's just nuts. But it's understandable. Like he's going to get more years. They say $250 million for that guy. Maybe it's going to be an 8-year deal, and good for him. Don't get me wrong. But my thing is, given the Padres situation, I think he makes a lot more sense. So then the question becomes, how do you move Trent Grisham? I think in order to move Trent Grisham, it would be a little bit similar to Jake Cronenworth, in the sense that not Jake Cronenworth. It would be a little bit similar to what I was attesting to earlier, which is that he would be the cherry on top of a deal. Andy Martino of SNY has been reporting that the Padres, just to read directly from the article, according to league sources briefed on talks, San Diego is asking for pitcher Michael King, pitching prospect Drew Thorpe, and as many as 4 or 5 other prospects like Randy Vasquez and Johnny Brito, and was also interested in salary relief, not just for Soto, but for center fielder Trent Grisham, sources say. Now, I know a lot of Yankees fans were freaking out, like that's too much, and frankly, I think that for a team that hasn't been competing in so long and it's shown that they don't care, God forbid you maybe overpay just a little bit. This is just negotiations. I don't think they're going to get all of those things. I don't think you're going to get prospects and pitchers and salary relief for not just Soto, but also Trent Grisham. Like, I don't see them doing all of that, but I think offloading Grisham would be interesting. You would get salary relief for sure. And that also tells me, honestly, because I think Cronenworth is the bigger issue with salary relief. And I do think that Grisham has a little bit more value because he's not extended the way that Jake Cronenworth is. I think if Cronenworth was a 5-year deal, more teams would be interested. But you're probably looking at a situation where you'd have to give up prospects to get rid of Jake Cronenworth. And I know maybe some of you are thinking, well, they said that about Hosmer, and that didn't necessarily have to happen, right? Like, we didn't do that. Well, sort of, because we gave the Nationals also a bunch of other prospects, so it was part of that deal, sort of. And then, of course, he ends up, killing Luke Voigt as his last act of hatred against our team, right? I think he's still blocking me on Twitter. I'm about to check my main account, actually. Kind of hope that he blocked me on my main account. That'd be hilarious. Let me see. Eric Hosmer. Let me see. No, he hasn't blocked me on my main account. Sorry. That would have been fun, though. Anyway, so with all that, I think that moving Grisham would be a huge priority. And if you move Grisham, and if they are reportedly trying to move Grisham, I think that also bodes well for them trying to get Jung-Hoo Lee. I do. On top of the fact that they're already reported interest in him, and now you have it that they're trying to move Grisham, it adds up. It adds up. I think that this would be an awesome move. just cleaning things up a little bit, saying, all right, yeah, I know we're going to lose Soto, but guess what? We have the stars. We have the stars, especially in the lineup. The bigger thing with the Padres is going to be pitching. Can you get one of Michael King or Drew Thorpe? That's what I would be trying to do with this deal. And frankly, I think that's what might happen. Although it would be hilarious if he went to the Blue Jays, because as someone on the East Coast, I would love the sports talk radio and all the New Yorkers losing their mind that they once again lose out on a player. But I like it. I like the idea of trade Grisham, you trade Soto. Let's say they both go to the Yankees. You get some salary relief. Maybe you get Peraza or Johnny Brito, something like that, and one of Michael King or Drew Thorpe. It sounds like both of them is the hang up. I know a lot of people are talking about Michael King, like how are you letting that hold up a deal? I think they just want to keep at least one of them because they're also a little bit thin in starting pitching, a little bit, because they don't know what they're getting from Rodon. They have Cole, and they just lost Severino, and they don't know what's going to happen with Nestor if he's healthy. They lost Domingo Germán. Like there's some questions with their rotation. So I think that they do want to keep assets. They're as my buddy Jack McMullen of Just Baseball said, they're plan B, C, D, and E. You know what I mean? Like all of their backup plans. They want to at least have some backup plans. And can we really, as Padres fans, fault them? Look what happened to us this year. It would have been nice if we had some backup plans at points, right? Just to have some depth. So I totally get that. So doing that deal, you get some salary relief from Soto. I know it stinks, but this is just the product of trading for a player that didn't want to sign an extension and or trading for that player and then extending everybody else on the team before him, right? So that could be an issue. I know some people are like, well, that's okay. It's still worth 2.5 years of Soto. Agreed, but we're not getting that last year. You know what I mean? Like that shows you that they didn't necessarily plan ahead in this situation. You do that. You move all of that. You get some nice needed backup. You have a little bit of stuff. And not to mention, maybe Robbie Snelling could be a guy that you can count on, at least as a back-end rotation guy for next year. And then you maybe sign a Frankie Montas. You know, you get some back-end guys who won't cost too much. And then you have Jung-Hoo Lee in left. You have Merrill, a Zokar, whatever, in center field, right? Like, figure it out. Just get someone who's decent. And then you have Tatis in right field. It's not too bad. It's not too bad, guys. Like, I really don't think that this team isn't as... They're a really frustrating team, but as I've said many times before, at least they're a team that's willing to spend and make moves. Because if they weren't, oh boy, we'd be in trouble. Then it'd be like a lot different. But do you really want to be in the White Sox position? Their highest paid player ever in the history of their franchise is Andrew Benintendi. Do you really want to be the Rockies? Do you really want to be the A's, who won't even exist anymore? Do you want to be the Angels? Do you want to be the Guardians? Do you want... the Guardians are good, but you get my point. Do you want to be the Brewers, those cheapskates? No, you don't. You don't. Do you want to be the Orioles? In my opinion, no. If I knew the Orioles were spending, that would be the most exciting team in baseball. But since they're not spending, and it doesn't sound like they will as of right now, I don't want to be the Orioles. So for all of that, I've been rambling a lot, but that's how I feel about this whole situation, why I think getting off of Grisham would be important. I'm wondering if, since we haven't heard about Cronenworth, what's going to happen there? That's the only other question that I have, is while the rest of the team sounds great in this hypothetical I built up, what are you going to do with Cronenworth? Because moving Bogarts to first base doesn't really sound like it's going to happen, based on not just what he said, but others have said. I'd love to have Cronenworth back in the infield. And frankly, I think that he's an appetizing target for other teams that want a utility infielder. But the contract, man, that contract is up there for worst moves AJ Preller has ever made. And it almost has nothing to do with Cronenworth. But it was like, who were you bidding against? That's my big thing. At least Hosmer, you can make the case that it was like, we just wanted to have a name and show that we were really serious about bringing in players. Because everybody seems to adore Eric Hosmer, including Austin Hedges, including Machado, right? Like, they all love this guy. So maybe that signing, at least you could argue, was them saying, we know this won't age well, but he'll be a solid leader in the clubhouse. He's got a winning pedigree, and he just shows that we're serious. Maybe. That's the very liberal interpretation of that, right? Like, that's the most giving interpretation of it. But Cronenworth, it's like, you had him under control. He's a utility player. Usually I don't like extending utility players like that. And you gave him 7 years? Who were you bidding against? I just don't understand. If he would... Jay Cronenworth would be an awesome trade piece right now if he was not extended. And if he was extended for just 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is, I think he would still be a really good trade piece. But since he is 7, guys, this might just be a problem. We'll have to see. We got to hope that he gets better. Or they figure out what to do at first base. I don't know. But yeah, those are my thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you enjoyed them on this Tuesday evening. With that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay tuned tomorrow for a little bit of a look on the lower tier free agents still out there. We looked at the top tier free agents. Now we're going to talk about some lower tier ones that could be interesting. And even if they don't fully make sense, it's just fun to talk about them because what else are we going to talk about? You know what I mean? So look forward to that tomorrow, guys. Until next time, stay safeful. Stay safeful. This is what happens when I talk too fast. I gotta get better at talking slower. Stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.